Hello, I'm Jim Cornwall, and this is the WalkingPost.com podcast. WalkingPost.com is the news website dedicated to walking, with all the latest on gear, books, events, fitness, health, trails and festivals, and more. This podcast is number 55 and it's going live on June the 5th. My son's hiking overnighter went off without incident, and as soon as he got back, it started raining and hasn't stopped since. Other than the rain, not a great deal to report. We're doing one of those life transition moments on Monday when we change internet provider. It might be a painful week ahead. Let's get to June the 5th. It's Hot Air Balloon Day. I've never actually done that and have no desire to. I have done photography strapped to the outside of a plane before, but for some reason it didn't seem as dangerous. Although having said that, I wouldn't do that now either. It's why we bought a drone. It's Gingerbread Day, Sausage Roll Day, Veggie Burger Day, Donut Day, and because of all that, it should probably be Watch Your Weight Day as well, but it isn't. It's World Environment Day though, it's Thank You Day, and it is Constitution Day in Denmark. And that is because it's the day in 1849 that Denmark became a constitutional monarchy. And it is also the date that the Nintendo Switch 2 console was released, sending people everywhere, including my son, into a got-to-have-it state. Bit of a struggle this week for globally known birthdays. Maybe the closest would be the musicians Laurie Anderson and Kenny G. Last week we talked to a hiking camp counsellor, and this week, for whatever reason, we decided to break the local heatwave by deciding to do an episode on heatstroke with Dr. Cheyenne Falat, the Assistant Medical Director of the Adult Emergency Department at the University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore. But there is no doubt a heatwave somewhere, and we are listened to in more than 30 countries, and I am also sure that there will be more heat waves to come. So, some great information coming up for you. Before we get going, if you do have news, guest ideas, or even subjects to cover or comments, or you want to advertise, please do get in touch via walkingpost.com, or you can just email me at jim@walkingpost.com. Okay, let's go through some of the headlines of the news articles you may have missed that we had on walkingpost.com this past week. The Two Moors Way celebrated its anniversary with an extension. Canada's first outdoor gear repair and advanced manufacturing centre opened. And the Get Outdoors program for 2027 in Pennsylvania has connected to the US 250th anniversary. Back to Canada because it's invested in some trails in the Maritimes to benefit climate resilience and biodiversity. In the UK, Ironbridge Gorge joined a national trail celebrating the UK's industrial heritage, and repair work has started on the only trail in the US Virgin Islands. New plans have been announced to boost walking in London. Walking and more sleep could protect mental health in middle age, and you can read all of these and more at walkingpost.com. This was an episode of the podcast just waiting to happen, and of course the results have been as expected. There's been a heatwave in Europe for several weeks, and the moment we decide to do a podcast episode on heat stroke and how to deal with being out in the sun, the weather changes. Today, for example, here in Western Scotland, thunderstorms and 14 degrees. But somewhere it's hot, so we're off the hook. And you can guarantee there are going to be more heat waves to come pretty much everywhere, and that has an impact on walking and hiking, of course. We have the perfect guest for that today, though, because Dr. Cheyenne Falat is the Assistant Medical Director of the Adult Emergency Department at the University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore, the academic flagship hospital for the University of Maryland Medical Center. She's also an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. A practicing emergency department physician for about a decade, Dr. Falat's niche and area of special interest is in environmental emergency medicine, with a specific area of interest in weather-related injuries and wilderness medicine. She's also an avid skier and, of course, hiker. All right, great to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for your input on this subject. Maybe you could just give us a little bit of a brief introduction for us.
Absolutely. So my name is Cheyenne Falat. I'm an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. And I work at the University of Maryland Medical Center as an emergency doctor, seeing patients who come to my door. However, what I really love and what my passion is taking care of patients who are brought to me with environmental injuries. So injuries sustained from the environment or from the wilderness. So things like heat stroke, hypothermia, frostbite, drownings, altitude illness, lightning injuries, all of which are potentially very high mortality cases if left untreated, but cases in which we can make a tremendous impact and save a lot of lives if we know how to recognize and how to treat appropriately and treat early. So hoping I can share a little bit of my passion with you guys today.
Sure, absolutely. As far as heat stroke and sunstroke goes, are those two terms interchangeable or are there differences?
Those two are fairly interchangeable. Heat stroke is kind of the end stage of a spectrum of heat illness, ranging from mild heat illnesses to moderate heat illness, which we call heat exhaustion. And then heat stroke is kind of the end stage and most severe presentation, which is where the chance of fatality starts to set in.
Are you seeing any rise in numbers for that?
Absolutely. So, unfortunately, over the past few years, heat waves are not only occurring with increased frequency and increased duration, but also increased intensity, and not just in the United States where I live and work, but across the world. So, with those rises in heat waves, we are seeing an increase in the number of reported heat related deaths and heat related illness.
When somebody comes into the hospital or gets brought into the hospital with something like this, do you record the circumstances around that? I mean, are you able to split out, hiking incidents from a soccer game or from a ball game or from just being out in the sun?
From a perspective of epidemiological tracking, I think we have a lot of ways to go as far as accurately capturing these circumstances by which people develop heat illness so that we can parse out and determine which of those directions we need to focus most of our public education and public health. However, we do get that information, even if it's not kind of tracked from an epidemiological perspective and captured in final diagnoses. The information about the patient's circumstances are extraordinarily important when leading to diagnoses of environmental and wilderness injuries, not just heat stroke, but any of them. So sometimes the circumstances by which someone, let's say, is found unresponsive or found down or loses consciousness can truly make or break the diagnosis and can completely alter a patient's path to treatment and truly be life-saving. So we rely heavily on not just family members and friends who bring patients in who are able to tell us some of the story, but also on our pre-hospital colleagues like our EMS providers.
And I assume that the spectrum of ages is equally varied?
It is, but I think the type of presentation matters. So when we think of heat illness, we think of classic heat stroke and exertional heat stroke. So exertional heat stroke are really people who are engaging in not only athletics and recreational activities like hiking or running or football that predispose themselves to heat exposure and heat exhaustion and ultimately leading to heat stroke, but also occupations. So people with occupations such as construction or firemen and women who have to wear heavy gear and oftentimes have to do that outdoors and long hours in peak sun and with minimal hydration and minimal nutrition during that time. Those are all factors that lead to exertional heat stroke. And that we oftentimes see more so in people in their middle-aged years, mostly men, compared to women as far as demographics. But then when you talk about the other flip side, what we call classic heat stroke, it's really anyone else who develops heat stroke. So patients who are prone to developing heat illness just based on a variety of socioeconomic or physiologic factors. So in classic heat stroke, children of a very young age and elderly individuals of older age seem particularly prone to developing heat stroke just because their physiologic mechanisms or their body's response to recognizing and dealing with heat are either not yet fully developed in the case of young children or not as responsive in the case of older individuals. So the classic heat stroke we see more so at the extremes of age, and exertional heat stroke we see more so in the middle years.
Before we start talking about the signs and symptoms of those conditions, could you explain a little bit about the physiology of heat stroke as to what it does to the body?
Absolutely. So how we develop heat stroke, it's important to know how our body processes heat. So our body absorbs and dissipates heat through four major mechanisms. You have conduction, which is the transfer of heat from a warmer object to a cooler object; convection, which is the transfer of heat to a moving liquid or gas around us, such as the wind outside. We have evaporation, which is heat loss through the change in state from liquid to gaseous, such as sweating. And then radiation, which is our body's just loss of heat through electromagnetic waves. So, like when we're outside in the sun and we, let's say, sit down on a cold rock, that's helping us lose heat. When we mist ourselves and fan ourselves, that's helping us lose heat. So, what happens is, in order to assist in those processes, our body can do certain things. It relies on our peripheral nerves, such as those found in our skin, to be able to sense heat and then feed that input back to a very small part of our brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus essentially acts as the body's thermostat. It really wants to make sure that we have a set regulated temperature in our body, usually about 37 degrees Celsius, plus or minus about half a degree. And when that hypothalamus senses, wait a second, I'm starting to heat up from the outdoor temperature, it essentially turns on the air conditioning in our body. And it does so through two major mechanisms. One is it increases the amount of blood flow going to our skin to help with this conductive and convective and evaporative cooling, because it helps to cool that warmer blood that's in our body. And then it increases our body's ability to sweat. And so with increased sweating, we have increased evaporation and increased cooling. So for all of that to work effectively, our body has to be able to sense input with our nerves, coordinate that processes again with our brain and with our central nervous system, and then be able to execute those processes through effective sweating and ability to dilate out our blood vessels.
Do different parts of the body sweat at different rates?
There are a few different types of sweat glands in our body and different concentrations of those sweat glands throughout our body. We do tend to lose a lot of heat through our head, through our axilla or our armpits, through the back of the neck. So especially when you're trying to cool off and you're outdoors somewhere, you want to make sure that those parts of our bodies we try to expose as much as possible. But the sweat glands are kind of littered throughout the whole entire body.
Right, yeah. A lot of people wear not just deodorant, but antiperspirant. Is that a bad thing?
I think that once you start, the body's kind of hypothalamus starts kicking in your need to sweat, that trumps even whatever antiperspirant you're wearing at
Okay.
that point.
No, I didn't know whether that was a bad thing, if you're wearing antiperspirant, if you obviously you need to sweat to get rid of the heat, but if you're wearing antiperspirant, I just didn't know whether that was something that would be a cause for concern.
That's an excellent question. It's actually the first time I've gotten that question.
All right. Maybe move into the signs and symptoms now. What are the first signs personally? Because there's two things. There's observing it in others and observing it in ourselves. What are the
Mhm.
first signs that you yourself are getting heat stroke?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, heat stroke definitely is a spectrum of illness and it progresses along the spectrum. At the very earliest stages of heat illness, we have a variety of conditions that we classify as mild heat illness. It can include anything from what we call a heat rash or miliaria rubra, which is just kind of a prickly raised rash, generally under clothed areas of the body that can be a little itchy, and that's due to kind of occluded sweat ducts. You can have heat edema, which is essentially swelling of your body, mostly in the gravitationally dependent areas of the body, so in our legs. That's just due to some changes to where you collect and hold your blood flow, and that is generally, it resolves in about 2 or 3 days. There's nothing terribly much to do about it. You can wear compression stockings to help it, but it's not something that you need to like take fluid or water pills for. It's just your body kind of reprocessing the fluid distribution. You can have heat cramps, which are cramps of your skeletal muscles, so generally in your legs, that set in after a period of exercise, and that's generally due to not only dehydration in heat, but also loss of some of your electrolytes like your sodium. And then heat syncope, which is a very transient loss of consciousness just from, again, temporary blood flow redistribution in your body as your body tries to cool itself down. The hallmark of all of these is that it's really the first presenting sign or symptom that, like, hey, maybe we're not doing too well in response to the heat, and maybe we really need to take a step back from the heat, go indoors, cool ourselves off, make sure that we are hydrating with what we call balanced electrolyte fluids, so fluids that include salts, since we don't just sweat water, we sweat salt water from our body. So we need to keep replenishing the salt as well. But not always will someone experience these kind of mild heat illness conditions. What the first kind of major warning signs are that you're developing kind of more serious heat illness are really in that moderate stage, which we call heat exhaustion. And this is generally due to relative depletion of water and salt, so water and electrolytes. And it will lead to what we call pre-syncopal symptoms, or symptoms that are telling you, hey, you might pass out soon. You need help. You need to hydrate. You need to cool off. So see, these symptoms, I don't know how many of the listeners have ever had a loss of consciousness or have passed out before, but oftentimes in kind of the minute or few seconds leading up to it, you might feel nauseous, like you're going to vomit. You might get super sweaty. You might see your vision kind of starting to tunnel in. Your heart rate, you might sense that is a little up. You might have palpitations. You're just feeling like you're going to pass out. But it's important to know at this stage that you shouldn't have any neurological impairments yet. You shouldn't be confused. You shouldn't have difficulty with fine motor skills. You shouldn't be off balance. You just feel like you're going to pass out. And at this stage, it's really important that we recognize this is the major warning sign that if you don't get help immediately, and by get help, it means even, help yourself. Take a step back from the heat, go into the shade, go into an air-conditioned building if you have one available to you. If you're not sweating effectively, or if you need some assistance sweating, try to spritz yourself or mist yourself with water. Try to angle a fan at you, or fan yourself with even something like a magazine or a hat. Really try to cool off at that stage and hydrate. Hydration is key. So again, with those balanced fluid solutions, because if you leave heat exhaustion untreated and you stay in the heat and you don't hydrate, that can progress relatively quickly to heat stroke. And the hallmarks of heat stroke is that generally it's when the core temperature reaches above 40 degrees Celsius, but it's not necessary for the sake of diagnosis as long as you have the kind of clinical picture and the history that matches it. But it's really when there is some kind of neurologic impairment that sets in. So there's a very particular part of our brain called the cerebellum that seems to be most susceptible to damage from heat. And that's the part of our brain that's really responsible for a lot of our balance and coordination. So some of the early neurologic signs will be things like confusion, dizziness, unsteadiness, poor coordination, but that can progress relatively quickly to include complete alteration in your mental status, and then leading to seizure and comatose state and more lasting loss of consciousness. So at that point, it is really a medical emergency that carries a pretty high mortality rate. And at that point, immediate intervention, like less than 30 minutes to cool your core temperature, is really life-saving at that point.
Yeah, because I guess once you reach that stage, I would assume that your awareness of your own situation is impaired as well.
Absolutely. And this is also why when we talk about not just the exertional heat stroke, so oftentimes these are going to be in individuals once you're kind of blowing through that moderate heat exhaustion and you lead to heat stroke. It's oftentimes seen in athletes who are trained from a very young age to push themselves even through discomfort and really, be the best you can be and not back out. It's people who have these heroic jobs like firemen, policemen who don't want to step away from an active line of duty. A lot of times we see this in military recruits, in marathon runners. It's people who are really trying to achieve a goal and not back down. But I think as a society, we really need to normalize, hey, if you're having these symptoms, you should take a step back. You should really make sure that you're stepping away, you're cooling yourself off, you're hydrating. And then also what makes some of these things difficult to pick up on. And I'm glad you mentioned sometimes the difficulty with self-assessment of these symptoms is a lot of our patients are not only on some prescription medications or over-the-counter medications that can lead to a little bit of disorientation in addition to some like dehydration and dysregulation. So even things like diphenhydramine or what we call Benadryl in the US, medications that we use for allergies can oftentimes really not only dehydrate and start to a little bit disorient us, but can prevent appropriate mechanisms of sweating, for instance, and our ability to cool ourselves. And a variety of other medications like antipsychotics can lead to a little bit of disorientation and inability to recognize these symptoms. But then an extraordinary amount of people have either psychiatric issues and are just not able to accurately self-assess. Those patients oftentimes have confounding substance use issues that further contribute to the symptoms and inability to really recognize these symptoms. And then oftentimes those are also the same populations that have difficulty with housing access and are relatively unhoused and don't have appropriate access to hydration and to air-conditioned buildings and stuff like that. So it really is a lot of confounding factors that make not only the recognition of, but the treatment of these heat illnesses quite difficult.
And we just talked there briefly about the self-assessment. If you were in a hiking party or at a ball game, how can you assess that in others?
In that moderate stage, that heat exhaustion stage, some of those signs that feel like you're going to pass out may be visible to other people around you. You may start to get very sweaty. You may start to look like you're going to pass out. You might get pale. You might have a visibly raised like heart rate. Sometimes you can see kind of bulging neck veins and see that people have a quite heart rate. But those signs might be a little more subtle and might be a little more difficult to assess in other people. It's always a good idea when you're in an event like this, and it is going to be either warmer or more humid, because both of those make our body's inability to cool itself quite difficult, that you have a game plan and say, hey, listen, guys, it's going to be a hot one out there today. Let's make sure that we're holding each other accountable to drinking appropriate amounts of fluid. And if any of us start to get symptoms, let's speak up and let's make that okay. So really normalizing that and helping others, making sure that the others in your party know about these symptoms and know that self-assessment is important. But then really paying attention to, as you move into that heat stroke stage, if someone around you is starting to kind of mumble incoherently or not make sense, or you're noticing that they're really fumbling with things that they're normally good at, like opening a bottle of water or using a phone or using a camera, really paying attention to those fine motor skills. If they look off balance, if they're swaying or staggering when they're walking, all of those things could really tune you in that that person is suffering from those early signs of heat stroke. Now, it could also be that someone's intoxicated. I think it's always better safe than sorry, and especially if the conditions are quite warm or quite humid, you always want to kind of assume worst case scenario, even though we always hope for best case scenario.
Speaking of scenarios, if somebody is obviously it's if it's at a little league game or something like that, you're in one spot and it's generally in a city. If you were doing a remote hiking trail and you're 7 miles into a 15-mile hike, What are the best steps to take when you're in that remote situation and either yourself or someone else you spot these signs?
So prevention and having a strategy is definitely the way to go. That is the most important part of essentially treating heat stroke is preventing heat stroke. So making sure that you are paying attention to the weather forecasts ahead of time. If it's going to be a very high heat index day, so that takes into account both the temperature and the humidity outdoors, maybe you reschedule that hike. Maybe you do it in the morning hours before about 10 or 11 a.m. before the sun is at peak, or maybe you do it in the later afternoon hours, such as 3 or 4 p.m. onwards. So, really adjusting plans to what the weather is calling for. If you do decide to go out on a hike anyway, making sure that even before you do so, you've talked to your doctor, you make sure you don't have any medical conditions or that you're not taking any medications that would put you at a higher compromised state of developing heat stroke. If you still decide to go out, then making sure that you know rescue numbers and patrol people who are responsible for rendering care and aid in that area. So I know now with the onset of Instagram hiking and social media, a lot of people are traveling internationally all over the world to places that they wouldn't normally go to or be exposed in. So it's important that even if you're doing hikes in areas that you're not used to, that you have a mode of communication. So whether it's making sure that your cell phone is in service and has a plan that you can connect to help, or that you get one of those SIM cards and calling cards, making sure that you have a way to contact help and that you know what the number is to contact help. So a lot of times I do a lot of hiking in Europe. My family's from there, and there will be on a lot of the trailheads a sign with all of the emergency contact information. I always take a photo of that so that I have it with me and so that I can easily refer to it if needed. And then hiking, as you mentioned, in groups. So people who will be able to help you recognize signs or will be able to treat and make sure that everyone in that group has access to appropriate hydration stores. So as you are hiking, you're going to help your body prevent these end stage conditions if you stay well hydrated with those balanced electrolyte fluids. And then if something like heat stroke does set in when you are, as you mentioned, far along the hike, it's not ideal, to say the least. But even on those hikes, try to have a game plan of where to find shade, how to fan with either carrying a personal fan, having a hat or something with a more kind of sturdy structure that you can fan yourself with, and then extra ice and water. If it really comes down to it, there are improvised ways that people can cool themselves, such as what we call the taco technique or tarp assisted cooling with oscillation. It's essentially any kind of tarp or somewhat waterproof sheet that you can find. You just lay a person in there, dump as much ice water as you can into that sheet, and kind of just slosh them around like you would trying to prepare a taco or a burrito. And that kind of motion of that ice water around a person helps to cool them. And then a lot of hikes, honestly, are around some kind of water, bodies of water. So be it lakes or streams, and that water is generally some kind of mountain runoff, is cooler than the ambient air outside. So potentially if you're choosing to hike in the warmer months and during the day, structuring those hikes around bodies of water where if you needed access to cool yourself off, you could always jump in the river, jump in the lake, and just making sure that you can swim and that you're able to do so.
What should people do to start with? I mean, without looking at the symptoms and signs of issues, before you go, what should you be wearing? What should you be taking?
I recommend that when you want to start a new activity and let's say you want to pick up hiking, you're not a hiker. This is why we have primary care doctors. So talk to your doctor, make sure that your medical conditions and the medications that you're taking allow you to do so. Because again, there are certain medications, certain medical conditions that put us at particularly increased risk. If your doctor deems you to be in good health, you definitely want to dress in layers and in clothing that kind of allows that wicking of sweat kind of away from you and isn't necessarily tight and constrictive on your body. There are a lot of kind of synthetic fabrics, brands like North Face and Under Armour that are specifically and scientifically formulated to provide as much cooling as possible for hot and sweaty activities, and they don't kind of insulate that sweat against you. What you want is materials that allow that evaporative and radiative cooling. Alternatively, materials like cotton and linen are quite good, especially in the high heat in summer months, because they're airy. They allow for that convection cooling, they allow for that evaporative cooling. So dressing in layers, and then again, just making sure that you bring with you an adequate amount of hydration. And that can vary for every individual as far as really how much water and stuff you need to be drinking. What we recommend is that you are drinking enough that when you urinate, it's not yellow. Your urine should be clear. And so again, different people need different amounts of hydration to maintain that. But if you are doing these longer hikes, making sure that it's not just water that you continue to drink, but it's these balanced solutions, that you have a salt intake as well.
Some of the issues some people have with hydration is that they may have 2 liters or 4 liters even with them,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not really sure, okay, I'm really thirsty now, but I've got to save it for later because what if I get into trouble later? Should people be thinking that way, or should they be, if they're thirsty, they should take in water?
It's always a good idea to ration and make sure that you're not then stuck in a situation where you need something and you don't have it. But it's a good idea also as you're planning your hikes, especially if it's not in the most remote areas, but if there are like mountain cabins and stuff like that, check to see ahead of time. Is it possible to buy additional fluids and drinks as you progress along the hike, let's say at the top or mid-mountain areas? Is it possible? Do they have a water fountain? Is it possible to refill your waters there? Generally, especially when you're exerting yourself in the heat, it is a good approach to drink when thirsty. And perhaps that should inform you that if you've drinking everything that you have and you're a quarter of your way through your hike, that maybe that's not the day to complete that hike. Maybe you come back some other day when perhaps your body's need for hydration is a little less because it's not quite as hot or it's not quite as humid outside. Even though you want to be smart about your stores and making sure it will last you throughout your hike, maybe that should be an indication that it's not the day to do that.
You touched on that a little earlier as well about rearranging plans. And I think that that's something that a lot of professionals, whether it's a mountaineer or a physician, seem to stress the fact that maybe today isn't the day, or if it's hot, replan it, or go very early in the morning, later at night. So I think the ability to know when to stop is a difficult one to learn, but really important.
Absolutely. And it's so important, again, like you mentioned, not just in heat, but this past winter, for instance, was one of the most deadly winters as far as avalanche deaths recorded in the last 100 years when you look across the US and Europe. And some of that is truly freak accidents. Nature is dangerous. And sometimes as we push and keep pushing against nature, nature pushes back. But a lot of those things are unavoidable. We want to make sure that we are looking at weather conditions. And trust me, I'm a skier, snowboarder, hiker, surfer, swimmer. I do it all. But it's really when we talk about the environment and we talk about the dangers of the environment, it's important that our ego comes secondary to that. And we really let nature dictate what we do on a particular day. And we don't try to supersede when all the warning signs are there to take a step back and not do something that day. So part of engaging in these fun activities, that's my entire life,
Mm.
aside from work, is engaging in these activities. But it's also knowing when to not do them on a certain day and realizing that it's a better idea to come back and do it another day than to never have another day to do it.
Maybe social media has a bit of a part to play in this because everyone wants that great shot at the top of the mountain or
Yeah.
at the, in the slot canyon or whatever it is, but sometimes it's really just not worth it.
And everyone thinks that they're invincible, like nobody thinks that it's going to happen to them. But again, we are seeing a rise year after year in US heat related deaths that are reported out. And again, with the cold activity vests, with frostbite, with the drownings, drowning still remains the leading cause of death in children aged 1 to 4, and the third leading cause of unintentional injury deaths in the world. These are really not things to take lightly. And like you mentioned, that shot isn't worth your life.
Yeah, and it's great that people want to go out more and exercise more and be out in nature, but it's definitely changing. The climate is changing, so you have to be aware of the extremes more now than you did 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And I'm a huge proponent of outdoor activities, exercise. Go for it. Just do it safely and be prepared when you are doing it.
Some amazing advice there, so if you are going out and it's hot, you now have some guidelines. Living in Nevada was a real eye-opener for us with the number of people completely unprepared for hiking in the desert. It was almost a weekly occurrence. Although we have seen it here in Scotland on those rare hot days, with families going to tackle some pretty challenging hills and being totally unprepared in so many ways. Education is the key. I think the only way that we're going to have to worry about heat stroke here this weekend is if we stand too close to an open oven for a long period of time. And we rarely use that now thanks to the wonder that is air fryers. Not that this is an ad. If you do have news or suggestions for podcast guests, please do get in touch through jim@walkingpost.com. And as I always mention, we are always looking for guests, whether it's about a new trail, a new book, or a walking festival, or someone who has done an amazing or interesting walk somewhere. So, I hope you enjoyed this week's walkingpost.com podcast, and I hope you have a great week ahead, hopefully with a walk somewhere, whether it's in the rain or in the heat. Either way, be prepared. Until next time, happy trails! Walking Post from walkingpost.com is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.